does anybody want to answer, have a bunch of questions tonight? Anything in your mind that we had, or shall we take that on another night?
Or give us a half-hour teaching, and then if we have questions, we can ask maybe.
I don't think I have one of them, but I'll. I can cut it down, but yeah. Okay, well then, okay, and Jesus, we sure need your help tonight. So we always need your help, and no matter what it is that we're doing, we always need His help. And okay, well, I'll speak about the peace of God tonight then, and I'll quote a couple verses. Philippians 4:7, if anybody wants to look them up, it says, "The peace of God that passes all understanding shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." And then in John 14, verse 27, it says, "My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." And you notice there that he said the peace of God will keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. But he also says that we're not to not to be troubled or to be afraid. And I think by the time we're done tonight, you'll begin to really understand why it's important not to be troubled or afraid. Because the peace of God is a very precious thing. And people, I remember some years ago, Cindy, of course Cindy went on to be with the Lord now, but she was saying, "I like to have peace," but she said, I feel like I'm being selfish by having peace. And here's the thing, folks, the peace is one of your tools. It's extremely important. Without that peace, there's much about the Christian life that you can't do without God's peace. Jesus had the peace of God throughout his entire lifespan until he was on the cross, and then he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" For the first time, probably since he was born, here, God had withdrawn his presence from him. And he was so used to God's presence, so used to his peace, that it just was like devastating for him. And for Christians who live close to the Lord, who spend much time with the Lord, they have God's peace. And And whenever something, a thing of disobedience to God takes place in their life, and that peace is interrupted, it's very, very troublesome time to go through. If you can really develop God's peace in your life, there's an enormous amount of stuff that it will do in your life to help you and to guide you and to show you the way. Anyway, I want to give you an illustration of this, because when I was 20 years old, I joined a church. Now, I was a Mennonite in a Mennonite church, and this other one is also a Mennonite church. In fact, well, I don't want to tell you the name of it. I just say it was a Mennonite church, but it had false teaching in it. And they taught that if you're born again, you're part of the invisible church of God. All over the world, wherever you're at, if you're born again, you're part of the invisible church of God. But he said, if you want to be part of the visible church, you have to join our church. So it kind of put a distinction there between visible and invisible. In other words, when you're born again, it takes place inside of you and you can't see it. Okay? But they say that we can trace our lineage all the way back to Apostle Peter. And so therefore we are the true visible church on earth. Now the reason they said that was because in Revelation chapter 1, Jesus said that if the churches, if they don't, well, actually it was in chapter 2 and 3, he was talking about the 7 churches, okay, in Asia, and how he illustrated like they had a candlestick. And if you don't repent, the candlestick is going to be taken out of your midst. And what they were saying was that the Mennonite church had held the candlestick for hundreds of years, but they had fallen so far from God, so our church now has the candlestick. And anyway, but the thing I wanted to show you was when I was in that church, my mind became very troubled. It was almost like I was out on the ocean or out on the bay, the Gulf of Mexico or someplace, and there was a hurricane, and I was in the hurricane, and it was very troubling to my mind. It was tossing me everywhere. And one of the ladies there spoke to me, and she said, have you noticed how Satan comes against your mind in this church? And I said, yeah, I noticed that. What I didn't realize was this verse, it says, the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds. I just thought Satan was trying to do that because I had finally found the right church. But my mother knew that this was false teaching, and she started to try to get me convinced that I had got out of God's will by going there. And my former pastor also. And they worked for about 2.5 months before they finally succeeded in getting me to admit that I was in the wrong place. And then I came back. And when I came back, it was like I came off of these troubled waters into since I was in Sarasota, I pictured Sarasota Bay in my mind. Just like I came off of the Gulf, which was very troubled, and into Sarasota Bay, it was just nice and peaceful. And so God is teaching me out of that. He said that the peace of God can keep you from false teaching. You see, if you got God's peace in your heart, and you begin to do something that's disobedient to God, like false teaching, for instance, or joining a church that has false teaching, and you start accepting that, then as soon as you do that in disobedience to God, it's going to it's going to injure that peace. It's going to start troubling you, and you're going to. When you get to understanding this message, you'll begin to realize I'm out of God's will, and people don't realize how dangerous it is to get out of the will of God. We got Christians all over the world that are living on the edge of God's will. They don't even hardly know what the peace of God is. They remember when they were born again, and they knew how much peace they had when they were born again, but they kind of just live on the edge of God's will, and that peace just kind of flittered away, and now their life has got a certain amount of trouble in their mind. The deep peace of God that should be there is not there. And so when they do something that's disobedient to God, they don't have that peace being disrupted. I'll give you a bunch of illustrations because I've had many things happen to me, and I also can see illustrations in the Bible of this. But one of my illustrations I'd like to give you is that just to tell the people that have arrived, we're talking about the peace of God tonight, and I'm going to give some illustrations here. One of the illustrations here that when I was in Africa, I landed. The first time I went was in 2007. I went with a group, and I was there for 2 weeks. And when I was there, I made friends with the bishop that was doing the interpretation in that first trip. He interpreted for the people that ministered, and that ministered in the crusade. There was a crusade, and he ministered in the crusade. Now, a bunch of us also preached in individual churches, and they had different interpreters for that. But I made friends with that bishop, and he said, "You're coming back to Africa," and I said, "I think I am." In fact, that was the reason I went with them, was because I felt that God was calling me to go to Africa to preach. And but I didn't know what to do, so when this man told me, he says, "I'm going to Africa, do you want to go along?" I decided to go with him. Well, the first trip was all very protected, because there was a number of people on there, and they had certain kind of rules to try to protect people. But when I was going back, I couldn't find anybody to go back with me. So I emailed back and forth to this bishop, making arrangements to come back next year, 2008. And so when I was doing that, there was also a man from Pakistan. He said, "I want you to come to Pakistan." So I went ahead, and I figured I'm going to go to Pakistan too. So I went and got a ticket to Pakistan, and then I went to Washington, D.C., to the Pakistan embassy, and I tried to get a visa. And I just couldn't get the visa issued. And I tried and tried and finally gave up. And so when I got to Nairobi, Kenya, they had I had a ticket with Emirates Airlines to fly from Nairobi to Pakistan, and so I when I arrived there, it was it was after dark already. It was maybe 7:30, 8 o'clock, and then I had to go through customs and get out my suitcases and everything. And by that time, it was maybe 8 to 9 o'clock, so it was well after dark, and it gets dark there about 7. So there was a man there when I picked up my suitcases, and he said, "Can I get you a room for the night?" And I said, "No, I'm just going to stay in the airport, because tomorrow morning I'm leaving for Tanzania, and I'll just stay overnight in the airport." But I said, "There's something you can do for me. You can take me to the Emirates airline office, because I got a ticket that I got to talk to them about." So he took me out of the building and around, and it was getting kind of a dark place, a very dark place. And we finally got to their office, and the office was closed, and everything was dark, and there was enough light you could see, but it wasn't very bright, very much. And then he said it to me again. He said, "Can I get you a room for the night?" I said, "No, I'm going to stay here in the airport." Well, he said, "You can't get back inside." And here I had my 2 suitcases and all the money for that trip in my pocket. I was out there in the dark, and I didn't believe him. I went back to where I came out, and there was a man standing there and says, "You can't come in." He said, "What you have to do is you have to go all the way around to the other side of the airport." And that airport was kind of big. Now, I should have told you another thing so you can really understand what I was into. Because when I was there in 2007, they were getting ready to have an election. And the election took place maybe a week or 2 after I got back in 2007. Toward the end of the month of December. And when the election kind of went bad, there was things are very tribal over there, and the person who was the president of the country was from a certain tribe, and the person that was in the opposition that was running was from a different tribe. And so when the election was over, the president said, "I won." And the other guy thought he won, and the people that were voting for him thought he won. And there became very violent riots that started taking place. And they ran around, people from the other tribe ran around with machetes guns, whatever they could, kind of weapon they could get in hand. They chopped off arms and legs. If you go over there, you'll find people that don't have a leg. Some of them don't have arms because of that. And they would burn down people's houses with the people inside the house. In Eldoret, there was a church. People thought, well, we'll be safe in the church. And they ran for the church, and there was many people in that church, and they put the church on fire. So the mothers started throwing their kids out the windows to try to save their kids' lives, and the people would just pick up the kids and throw them right into the fire itself. And 2 kids, I think, out of that survived. But I knew a lot of what was going on there because I had a man in Nairobi that I supported, was a missionary, and he would send me his newsletters, and I knew all about that. And when I was out there trapped outside the building, that thing, I thought about that. All the people that had their arms and legs chopped off, and some of them their heads chopped off. People were shot, people were burnt, and he was telling that there were missionaries in the airport. They could hear the gunfire all around the airport while they were in there. And so here I was trapped outside of the building with my suitcases, and where I had to go through a crowd of men. And it was very dark. There was just an occasional light here or there. You could, it was even hard sometimes to make out a face because it was that dark. And I told the Lord, I said, I didn't put myself in this mess on purpose. I said, I know you're going to take care of me. And I just started walking around right through all those men. And I walked all the way around to the other side. And I related this to some other people there, and they said they couldn't believe that I survived that situation. But you see, I had faith in God because I had the peace of God in my heart. When you have the peace of God in your heart, you got your faith in God. God protects you. And if you are afraid, your fear is like faith in reverse. It's fear in the wrong thing. Instead of the fear being in God, your faith becomes into the thing that you're fearing, and it gives it the power to take you. So anyway, I got around to the other side, and before I went in, I saw the airline office, one of the airlines involved in for my trip going over to Tanzania. So I went in there to confirm my flight for the next morning. And I gave her my itinerary, and she went to the computer, and she was looking at this and that. And finally, after about 10 minutes, she said, your flight is not in the computer. But she said, I can see that you paid for it. I see the price you paid for it, and I see all that in your itinerary. But she said, it's not in there, and the plane is full. I can't put you in there. But she said, we're going to send another plane in a couple hours later. I will put you on that plane. Now I had a real problem because the bishop is supposed to be, this was on a Sunday morning, and the bishop was supposed to be there to pick me up so I could preach the morning message. And believe me, I did not have a single message when I left. Not a single message. God gave me the messages each day. I didn't know what I was going to do because in the airplane, it's hard to get before the Lord. It was just it's the wrong kind of atmosphere. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. And here my flight was going to be quite a bit later than what I had told the bishop. And he was going to have to go take care of his church. And he don't know that I'm coming at a later flight. I don't have no way of contacting him. But anyway, the next morning I got on the flight and went on over. And of course, when I got through customs in Tanzania, there was no bishop there. And here I was in a city of well over 1 million people. I did not know where the bishop lived. I I had his phone number, and I was going to bring it along, but when I looked for it, I could not find it. So apparently I had left it at home. No way to contact him. And I went out there, and there was a bunch of taxis out there, and one of the guys was just a young guy, maybe 20, 25 years old, a taxi driver. And I walked up to him, and I told him my predicament. And he said, that's okay. He said, we're going to find him. Because I had the name of the bishop. I did not know where he lived. I didn't know what the name of his church was. I didn't, just all series of things. But it was Sunday morning, and by that time, some of the churches were leaving out. So on the way to town from the airport, he just stopped at church after church after church, and finally he found a church that knew who this guy was. And then he took me to there. So you see how the peace of God kept me time after time. And I could give you story after story about that, where the peace of God kept me overseas. And not knowing anybody, not knowing how to contact anybody, being alone, a white man in a black man's world. But you see, God can keep you in any kind of situation, any kind of circumstances. And he kept me. So it's very important that you have God's peace in your heart. God had told me, he said, it don't matter what kind of situation you're in. He said, never, ever be afraid. Do not be afraid. And you notice that whenever, if you read in the Bible, where God would appear to somebody or an angel would appear to somebody, what was the first thing out of the angel's mouth? Don't be afraid. Fear not. Do not be afraid. Because you see, fear works against God's principles. Fear works against what you... Now, it might be normal for you to have some fear for your everyday life. You don't want to walk too close to the edge of a cliff or... put yourself purposely in danger. And that's for your everyday life. But when it comes to spiritual things, you don't want to be afraid. You don't want to have any fear. Because, you see, fear not only has torment, but fear makes you vulnerable to the enemy. And you will get taken. So, we have a couple of accounts in the Bible, Remember the 3 Hebrew children. 3 Hebrew children, they were called to the dedication of an idol by King Nebuchadnezzar. And this was a huge idol, about 90 feet tall, and maybe 9 or 10 feet wide, something like that. And Nebuchadnezzar had made this big idol, and he said that there's all kinds of instruments going to play music. And when that music plays, you have to fall down and worship this idol, or I will cast you into the fiery furnace. Now, all of his what do you call it? People that were in charge in his kingdom, they had to all be there. For some reason or another, Daniel wasn't there. I'm not sure why Daniel wasn't there. But the 3 Hebrew children were there, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And when the music played, they did not fall down to worship the idol. So some people were standing there, and they said they saw that they did not worship the idol. So they went up to told the king, said, they're not worshiping your idol, the image that you set up. King says, bring them to me. And when it got in before the king says, I'm going to give you another chance. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not reading it directly. I'm going to give you another chance. When the music plays, you bow down and worship this idol. If you don't, I'm going to throw you in the fiery furnace. And what kind of God's going to save you from that, from my hands? Now, here's something. King Nebuchadnezzar was a very fearsome man. I don't think there were very many people that would have stood up against this king. But these people, these 3 Hebrew children stood right out to him and says, we're not even going to be careful how we answer you. We are not going to bow down and worship the idol that you set up. We don't know if God's going to deliver us or not from the fiery furnace. But we do know that He's going to deliver us out of your hands. And so, when a person speaks like that to a king like that, they've got to know their God. There must be some real peace in their heart. Because the king got so mad that he said, make the furnace 7 times hotter. And he got the strongest men. He said, bind them hand and foot and throw them into there. Well, the fire was so hot that it killed the men that threw them into there. But all it did to them was to burn off the ropes off of them. And then the king looked in there and he says, wow, what's wrong? He said, did we throw 3 guys in there? There's 4 guys in there walking around and they don't have hurt. And he said, the 4th looks like the Son of God. You see, Jesus met them in the fire, but they were not afraid. They were not afraid of the king's commandment. That is what saved them. I'm quite sure that it was because they were not afraid. Because it would have been, almost anybody would have been terribly afraid to have said that to the king. Say, I am not going to bow down and worship the idol. But they had made up their mind they were going to worship God, and that is all they were going to worship. And they spoke out like that. And of course, Daniel, they had made a rule that nobody was allowed to ask anything from any god but the king. And the word pray, by the way, is the same word as to ask. They're identical in the original languages. So when he says you're not to ask anything of any god, it means that you're not allowed to pray to God. And if you ask things from people, remember that when you are asking people for things, you're actually praying. Whether you think of it that way or not, you are actually praying at that point. So you put your mind on the Lord, and you ask of God. You ask of God. Well, Daniel, when they that commandment, Daniel determined in his heart he was going to pray only to God. I'm not going to ask the king. I'm going to ask God. That's the way it is. And so I think if people would get that, they wouldn't be constantly asking people for things. They would get the idea that when you ask for things, you want to ask God only. You don't want to ask for people. I never ask anybody for an offering. Because if I did, I'm praying to you. I'm asking you when God is the one who has everything that I need. And so I never run out of money because I always ask of God. I don't ask from people. And I have not been out of money for 10 years. Now, I haven't had a lot of money, but I always had enough for everything I needed to do. For 10 years, I've never run out of money. But see, Daniel said, I'm only going to... He prayed to God 3 times a day. He's only going to pray to God. And so what happened? He had to be thrown into the den of lions. The king didn't want to do that, but he had foolishly agreed to that law that said that you could only ask the king, you could not ask of God. So, anyway, he was cast into the den of lions, and of course God sent an angel and they shut the lion's mouth. They couldn't do anything to him. So here's the point that I want to make is that peace of God is so very important in your life. It is one of your tools. And you're going to see other reasons why, because I'm going to give you some more illustration. But and then we'll begin to really get into this thing, because I just want you to understand how important it is to be always at peace with God. Because the peace of God can only be disturbed from the inside of you. Now, if you have 2 people that are fighting, let's say 2 of you guys were fighting, or maybe it's one of you were fighting with me, and we decide, well, it's not a good idea to fight, and we go and make peace. Well, that there is from the outside in. And because it's from the outside in, it's not very stable. And, all it takes is somebody say, oh, but I still think I'm right. No, you're not. So in a moment, that peace is broken. But you see, the peace of God comes from the inside. And Jesus had that peace when he stood before the Sanhedrin. He had that peace when he was in the garden, sweating as it were great drops of blood. He had that peace when they nailed him to the cross. You see, that peace cannot be disturbed from the outside. The only thing that can disturb the peace of God is disobedience. If you're disobedient to the command of God, that's what disturbs the peace of God. So spend time getting the peace of God in your heart. It's extremely important. And it's your protection. So if you think, you might be coming up to some kind of deal, like maybe in your business or something, and it just seems like if I would say a lie, I could get out of this problem. So you say a lie. Or you might think, I need a little more money than I'm getting, so you just add a little bit to your time card. A little bit more time to the time card, so you get a little more money. Or any kind of little deal like that. You see, anything that it begins to get a check inside your mind saying, this may not be exactly right. You see, what that does is it disturbs your peace. And then you are put yourself into a position of danger. You see, if I didn't have the peace of God in my heart, I would have been in a place of great danger. But you see, I was in the center of God's will. There's no safer place on earth than the center of God's will. David, I think, was the one that wrote Psalm 91, where he said, he that dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. And then in there somewhere he says, 1,000 shall fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it won't come near you. If you got God's peace in your heart, if you're in the center of God's will, the only thing that can happen to you is what God wills. You see, if I'm in the center of God's will and I get cancer, and it's not God's will for me to die, that cancer can't take my life. Because I'm in the center of God's will. So instead of trying to pray to God and say, take away the cancer, tell God, I want to be in the center of your will. I want exactly what you want. And you will become an overcomer instead of, you see, when you are healed instantly, you didn't overcome anything. God just supernaturally did it for you. But you see, all the wonderful things of God are promised to overcomers. They're not promised to people that get healed instantly. Now, there's nothing wrong with being healed instantly. I would accept that. But you see, my desire is to be an overcomer. Because overcomers, he says, they're going to give them, what is it exactly how to say it? But there's a whole series of them in Revelation chapter 2 and 3, where he says, he that overcomes will I grant to eat of the tree of life. I will give him a new stone. I will give him power over the nations. I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. I will grant him to sit with me on my throne. And then when you get toward the end of the Revelation, it says, he that overcometh shall inherit all things. So if I get out of all the problems in my life by miracles, I didn't overcome anything. God did that. So I need to be an overcomer. So if there's a physical difficulty, I just seek to be in God's will. I let him worry about my physical difficulties. Because I want to be an overcomer. And I know that thing can't take my life until God says it's time for you to come home. All I have to do is stay in the center of God's will. Not only that, but you see, if I do that, I'm also in position to help other people that have problems. So that's where I try to stay. And you see, if you're in the center of God's will, you got his peace. And the more you spend time with God, the more you will be in peace. And you will not want to get out of that place whatsoever, because when you're used to feeling that peace for years and years, and you get out from under that peace, it's like, I can't explain to you how it's kind of like a person that's used to looking through glasses, and they take the glasses off and they can't see anything, So it's very, very important to your life. But let me give you another example. My wife left me about a little over 18 years ago, and I was in this one church, and one of the ladies there was seemed to be a very fine young lady, Christian lady, and loved the Lord and everything, and very active in the church. And she started looking at me, and she thought she wanted to develop a relationship with me. So I thought, well, she's a good Christian, and she would be a nice one for her to be my wife. And but then, as I thought upon it, I began to get this just a little thing in my mind that began to bother me. And I getting a check there. But I just said, well, I think Satan is doing that because he don't want me to get a good wife. So I didn't pay any more attention to it. And then about 2 weeks later, I was trying to read my Bible, and the Bible didn't seem to mean anything to me. I don't know why my Bible not meaning anything to me today. I could not seem to get into a spirit of where it would mean something to me. And I tried to pray, and it just seemed like it wasn't going through the ceiling. And finally I just said, God, what is wrong? And her face came immediately before my mind. I saw her face in my mind. And I knew immediately God was saying, I'm the one that put the check in your mind. So Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice, another they will not follow. You see, it was another master that was getting me to hear the voice that I was to make this woman my wife. That was another master. And so when it disturbed my peace, I knew there was something wrong. And when I found out what it was, then I knew that I was not to go that direction. And so here the peace of God has kept me from false teaching. It has kept me from the danger around me, from people. And I could tell you of times when there were robbers around me that were ready to rob me. And the peace of God kept me there too. And it's kept me now from marrying the wrong woman. So the peace of God is important. We need to hear God's voice. What we need to do is learn to hear God's voice. And make up our mind that we are not going to follow anything but the Spirit of God. Let me see what time it is. I forgot to look. Okay. So how do you get to where you can hear God's voice and to follow Him, and how that you can develop that peace down inside of you? Because every part of your life, you need to be able to hear what God has to say. Because He has a plan for everything. And we learn to follow His plan. It's going to make all the difference in our lives. If I didn't have the peace of God when I got to Africa, I don't believe I would be alive right now. I'm pretty sure I would never not be alive. I would be dead. If nothing else, I would have had all my money taken from me, and I don't know how to get back from there. So what I'm trying to say to you is it's very important, and I have to have it where I go. I've got to have it. I cannot go any other way. It has to be there. So how do you do that? Well, you need to spend a lot of time with Jesus. The first thing is, if you look around you, you see, try to look around at all the people that you see in the Bible and tell me which one lived a perfect life. If you would look at Adam, did Adam live a perfect life? Did he make mistakes? He made mistakes. Well, how about Abraham? How about Noah? Moses? David? They all had some problems, huh? About Apostle Paul. So if you want to know the way, who in the Bible could you go to find the way? Who in the Bible lived a perfect life? Jesus. He's the only one, huh? So if you keep that in mind, you see, there are a lot of people that want to go back to the early church and do the things the way the early church did. But the early church wasn't perfect. There was something wrong. There were things wrong with it. And if you go by what they did, whatever they did wrong, you'll be doing wrong. You see. So who is our example? It's Jesus, right? The Bible says he is our example that we should do as he did. And when Jesus washed the disciples' feet, he said, I've given you an example for you to do like I've done. As your Lord and Master washed your feet, you need to wash one another's feet. So you see here that there is, he's demonstrating to us humility. Because you see, there was none greater than Jesus. He was the greatest man ever upon this earth. And you could say God-man, because he was God and he was man. But he was the greatest on this earth, and yet he humbled himself like a servant to wash the feet. So he served his fellow man, humbly served his fellow man. So we need to learn to walk as he walked, and not to please ourselves. You see, we tend to want to do things that please ourselves, but the Bible says somewhere, it says, bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. And then he said, we ought to bear one another's burdens and not to please ourselves. And so Jesus is our example. So what do we need? We need to spend a lot of time with Jesus. Because if you follow anybody else, you're never going to get, you may be a Christian, you may live a pretty good life, but you're never going to fulfill what God called you to do. What God called you to do can only be fulfilled if you're following Jesus. Because he's the only one fulfilled everything he was called to do. He was the only one that lived a perfect life. He's the only one that knows the way perfectly, all the way. And what does he do? The Bible says that the Word of God is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. What is a lamp? A lamp is something that they had these little oil lamps that were made with, they used olive oil, and it would make enough light that if in this room, if this room was all dark, you could get enough light to make a few steps, to go a few places, but you may not be able to see things clearly on the other side of the room. And the Bible is, and also Jesus and everything, it's all designed for us to take one step at a time, to light up the way one step at a time. So spend time with Jesus. You need him every day. Jesus, every day he spent time with his Father. He needed his Father because he said the Son can do nothing but what he sees his Father do. And then in John 15 he says, you can do nothing. Without me you can do nothing. So there's nothing we can do that's of value, eternal value, unless we are spending time with Jesus. And if we're spending time with Jesus, what's happening is when you get to spend time with Jesus, you want to do it the same way you do when you go to the doctor. If you go into the doctor's office and you tell the doctor, I want you to find out what's wrong with me. And the doctor says, well, I want you to open up your shirt so that I can take my stethoscope in, and I'll check your heartbeat and I'll check the breathing and everything. But you said, I ain't going to open up my shirt. Oh, I didn't come in here to open up my shirt. I came in here for you to tell me what's wrong with me. Well, you see, if you go to Jesus that way, you see, when you go to Jesus, you surrender to Him. He's the one that knows everything. So you go to Him in full surrender. I completely surrender to you, Jesus. Whatever you say, I'm going to do. I am committed to do what He says. So when the doctor gets through examining you, he takes out his pen and paper and he begins writing out, and he says, take this prescription down to the drugstore and get it filled, and I want you to take this medicine, maybe 3 times a day or whatever. So you commit yourself to take the medicine that He gives you. When you go to Jesus, you go in full surrender that He can know He can tell you what's wrong, and you commit yourself to do what He says. And if you will do that, the Bible says, seek you first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all the things you need will be added to you. So the first thing you're doing to seek the kingdom of God is you're surrendering to Jesus, and you are making up your mind that I'm going to do what He tells me to do. I'm going to live in obedience to Jesus Christ. If you do that, God's peace is going to keep developing in your life. You do that every day, every day, every day, every day. And the peace will just keep growing and growing. And the time will come when the slightest little sidestepping of what God's will is, the slightest little bit of it, you'll feel it immediately. And you will immediately say, I'm not going that way. I'm not going that way. When I was out in the world, away from God, I had a big hole in my heart, and no matter what I tried to put in it, nothing seemed to even touch it. And when I came to the Lord, instantly that hole was filled. Because, you see, the hole is infinite. You can put the entire world in there, and it won't take any room up. And the hole will still be as big as it was before. But if you put an infinite God in there, an infinite God can fill an infinite hole. So when I sometimes had a hard times, in my Christian life, there were a few times when I thought, I might just go back out into the world. And immediately that hole would begin to appear, and I said, no, I ain't going back. I'm not going that way. Never again am I going that way. You see, God's peace is very, very important to your life. Take time to develop the peace of God in your heart, and God will make a way for you. Don't live an iffy life. I'm not exactly sure whether this is right to do or not, but I want to do it, and I'll just do it. And if it's wrong, I'll ask Jesus to forgive me. And will Jesus forgive you? Of course. But what you're doing is you're developing a nature of sin in your life, and you are beginning to damage the peace of God in your life. Yeah, Jesus will forgive you, but don't spend time getting off course, you see. And there's going to time. You see, we're living in a world where we can't live a perfect life. There's going to be times when it's going to take you out whether you want to or not. It seems like sin has a way of trying to take you by force. And if you start dwelling on something a little bit too long, you may not be able to come up with the spiritual strength to stop from going off course. So get your life back in order. Ask Jesus to forgive you, and determine I'm not going that way again. And just keep working at not going off course, because this is a life that we are living. We need to keep developing strength to overcome this and that and the other things that are in our life. And it's an ongoing thing. I don't know how long it's going to last. God only knows. But that's what we need to do, is keep working at it. Is there anybody that has any questions or anything that they want to ask? Yes.
Did you say that the Amish weren't strong Christians? Is that what you're trying to say?
The Amish weren't strong Christians?
Yeah, you were talking about Amish and Mennonites.
Well, Mennonites, Amish, In every church you have people that love the Lord and people that don't, usually. There may be some churches that don't, I don't know, but generally speaking, I won't say that about any group of people.
Well, the reason I asked is I thought that I know a lot of God-fearing people.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't say anything. There was a church that had that teaching that was a false teaching. Now, I don't judge anybody else in that church. That one lady told me, she said, did you notice how Satan comes against your mind in that church? So I knew that she was having the same troubled mind I had. But I don't know that, I can't judge anybody else. I don't know. I would assume that they would have trouble in their mind and didn't realize what it was from. I would assume they would think that Satan was trying to trouble their mind because they knew the truth, the same way I was thinking. I don't know, but I'm not here to judge the people. I'm just trying to show you that the peace of God will keep you from false teaching. You see, if you start going into false teaching away from what God says, and the pieces begin to interrupt, then you'll know that you're going the wrong direction. And you see, the safest place on earth is in the center of God's will. And for the 3 Hebrew children, it was right in the middle of a fiery furnace. And for Daniel, it was right in a lion's den. And for me, it was out there, trapped outside an airport. You see, I was in the center of God's will, and no evil could take me. And many other people may be going through their fear of what was going on, and they fall. I see people all the time coming down with cancer, coming down with all kinds of diseases, dying all around me. I've seen it happen here a number of times. And everywhere I've gone, I've seen that kind of stuff. But you see, it's not necessary. All you need to do is live in the center of God's will. That's all. Instead of trying to all the time trying to find a way for a doctor to cure it, set your sights on Jesus and get in the center of His will. And that stuff cannot take your life until Jesus says it's time to come home. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. It's a place of perfect safety. And it don't matter. And I know that I've been fighting things in my body for 10, 15 years. Where I'd sit down and my backbone would hurt, if I got against something. And I had things exploding out of my head. I had moles that hurt me, and I could tell you a whole series of things. A time when it felt like something hit me right in the jaw. And it's like and it lasted for 6 months. Every time I yawn, it hurt, and if I chew, it hurt. My jaw would hurt. But you see, I don't even worry about it. I say it can't do anything to me. So it hurts me a little bit. That's okay. I don't worry about it hurting me. I know my God, and I know it can't take me. And so I don't worry about it. And I don't know what's wrong in me. It might be cancer. I've suspected it was because I have a tumor over my eye I've had for years. And I've had all kinds of problems in my physical body. I've had a heart attack. I've had backs that were so bad shape that I walk like this, and a stomach that seemed like no matter what I did, it would upset. Even if I drank a glass of water, it got upset. And just all kinds of things like that have happened in my life. But none of it ever can take me. And it can't even stop me from one day of work. In the last 35 years, nothing wrong in my body was able to stop me from one day of work. No matter what it did. Because I know my God. And it can't take me. Is there any other questions? As soon as I say, oh my, I'm feeling so bad today, I don't think I'm going to work. God gave me the work. When I say I don't think I'm going to work, what am I doing? I'm forsaking what God told me to do that day. And then I am succumbing to it, and then I'm subject to being taken, my life being taken. So what I do is I don't allow it to take anything away from me. I just let it hurt or whatever it wants to do. I don't like for it to hurt, but I just go right on with trusting God. It's not going to take me. I'm going to do my work today no matter what it does. And as long as I do that way, it can't take me. Any other question or anybody? You got any ideas in your mind that you feel God put there and you want to suggest them or anything? I know that that Juanita has ideas. Go ahead.
Well, everybody here knows that I'm a fairly new Christian.
Okay. Okay.
And I got saved. I was always had a business for several years.
Mm-hmm.
I was probably one of the first people to work for.
Okay.
Because everything I did was all about the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I did. And once I got saved, I'm getting mad at what they've done. It's been 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since I got saved, it's like you can't hardly make it.
Okay.
It's not great.
Well, I'm glad to see progress in your life. That's very important. It's wonderful. Did you want to say anything else about it? Did you certainly have ideas, Juanita. I'm sure you do.
Well, I just think about that scripture that you mentioned in Philippians.
Uh-huh.
The NIV says, don't be anxious about anything and don't be afraid.
Okay.
The King James says, it says, be careful for nothing.
Okay.
And when people tell me, like, I know they're meaning it in love, when I relieve them, they say, be careful.
Mm-hmm.
And so that always comes again in a sense, because I don't be careful for anything in the sense, it's not the word that would be coming against the word. Of course, I don't say anything really to them.
Actually, in the old English language, that word careful actually means worried or anxious.
Right.
We don't use it that way hardly ever anymore, so the new translations will just change it to anxious.
So that is very real in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And people who, to get the peace of God that passes all understanding that will keep your heart and mind in Christ Jesus, you're not to be anxious about things, but to pray about everything. Everything. What does everything mean? Everything. If you prayed about everything, and then thanked Him for the answer,
You need to come up here.
then that peace of God that passes all understanding will keep your heart and mind. But if you're going around being worried and anxious and all this stuff, you will not have the peace of God.
When you know who God is and you know nothing can take you, what can make you worried? You can't be worried. You can't be anxious about things. That's why you're not careful about that. In the old English sense of being worried, you're not worried about it anymore because you know God's in charge of everything, and you're not going to. Everything's going to be okay. God's going to see to it everything's okay. Did you want to say something? Okay, all right. Anybody else? Anybody has anything in mind? Okay. God bless you guys.